I never thought a single misplaced receipt for a high-end juicer would be the thread that unraveled the most sophisticated embezzlement scheme my subdivision had ever seen. But when you watch the world through a gap in the blinds, you learn that the devil isn't in the details. He's in the recycling bin. It was a Tuesday, specifically a Tuesday in late October, when the wind has that biting edge that cuts right through your flannel shirt. The kind of day where the leaves aren't just falling, they're being ripped from the branches with violence. I was positioned as I usually am between the hours of 6 a.m. and 7:30 a.m. at the bay window of my second-floor guest bedroom. From this vantage point, I have a clear, unobstructed tactical view of the cul-de-sac. My coffee, a dark roast that had gone lukewarm about 20 minutes prior, sat untouched on the windowsill. I wasn't drinking it because I couldn't risk the movement. Down below, across the asphalt that was just beginning to crack from the seasonal temperature shifts, lived Arthur Pembroke. Arthur was the president of the Homeowners Association. He was the kind of man who measured the grass height of his neighbors with a literal ruler. I had seen him do it. I had seen him on hands and knees checking to see if the mulch in the Petersons' flower bed was the approved shade of midnight black or the forbidden charcoal gray. He was a tyrant in beige slacks, a dictator with a clipboard. But on this Tuesday, Arthur made a mistake. The recycling truck comes at 8 a.m. sharp. Arthur, usually a creature of military precision, always put his blue bin out the night before, exactly 6 inches from the curb, handle facing the house. But last night he hadn't. He came rushing out at 6:14 a.m. in a bathrobe that looked like it cost more than my first car, dragging the bin with a frantic, chaotic energy that was entirely uncharacteristic. He didn't place it, he shoved it. The lid bounced open and a gust of that violent October wind caught the contents. A single piece of paper, wadded up into a tight ball, escaped. It rolled across his driveway, a little tumbleweed of evidence, and lodged itself under the tire of his pristine, silver luxury sedan. Arthur didn't notice. He looked around, his eyes darting left and right, scanning the windows of the neighbors like a criminal escaping a bank vault. He pulled his robe tighter, shivered, and hurried back inside. The heavy oak door slammed shut, and the deadbolt clicked. I could hear it from here. I waited. Patience is the currency of the sneaky neighbor. You cannot rush the acquisition of intelligence. I watched his house for 45 minutes. I watched the way the morning light slowly crawled down the facade of his brick exterior. I watched the condensation evaporate off his windshield. At 7 a.m., the automatic sprinklers kicked on, misting the paper ball, but not dislodging it. At 7:05 a.m., I made my move. I put on my running shoes. I don't run, but they are quiet on the pavement, and grabbed a bag of trash from my kitchen. The alibi was simple. I was taking out my own trash, late, and would accidentally drop something near his driveway. I walked out into the chill. The air smelled of wet asphalt and impending rain. I crossed the street, my heart doing that slow, heavy thud against my ribs. I reached his driveway. I feigned a stumble, dropping my bag. As I bent to retrieve it, my hand snatched the wet, crumpled paper ball from under his tire. In one fluid motion, it was in my pocket. Back inside, with the blinds drawn and the safety of my kitchen surrounding me, I carefully uncrumpled the wet paper. It wasn't a receipt for a juicer. It was a receipt from a high-end, majestic casino resort in Las Vegas, dated 3 days ago. The total listed at the bottom was staggering, $45,000. But it wasn't a loss. It was a cash-out. Here is the problem. Arthur Pembroke had been soliciting donations from the entire neighborhood for the past 6 months for a community park revitalization project. He claimed we needed a new gazebo, new playground equipment, and a fountain. He had collected checks, he had collected cash, he had shown us blueprints, he had given tearful speeches about legacy and community value at the monthly meetings. and Arthur Pembroke had allegedly been in the hospital for the last week undergoing emergency back surgery. That was the email blast we all got. Please pray for Arthur. Surgery complication. Recovery slow. I looked at the receipt. I looked at the date. While we were all sending casseroles to his wife and leaving get well soon cards in his mailbox, Arthur was in Vegas, cashing out 45 grand. The investigation began in earnest. I needed to verify his location history. I went to the window. His car was there. The house was quiet. If he had back surgery, he should be bedridden. I pulled up the neighborhood Facebook group. There were 3 new posts from his wife, Linda, thanking everyone for the lasagna and stating that Arthur was resting comfortably but unable to take visitors due to the risk of infection. Risk of infection or risk of detection? I needed eyes inside that house. Fortunately, Arthur was a man of vanity. He had insisted on installing security cameras facing the street, but being the cheapskate he truly was, he hadn't bought a closed-circuit system. He bought those cheap Wi-Fi-enabled cameras that have default passwords if you don't change them. And Arthur, for all his clipboard tyranny, was a boomer who typed with 2 index fingers. I opened my laptop. I pulled up the Wi-Fi analyzer. I wasn't hacking. I was simply auditing the neighborhood signals. I found a signal named Pembroke Sec Guest. I tried the password 1234567 Incorrect. I tried password. Incorrect. I tried Pembroke 1. Connected. The man had his security cameras on a guest network with his own name as the password. It was almost insulting. I accessed the camera feed. He had one pointing at the driveway, one at the front door, and crucially, one in the living room, ostensibly to watch the dog. I pulled up the living room feed. The timestamp was live. The room was empty. The pristine white couches were untouched. Then, movement. Arthur walked into the frame. He was not using a walker. He was not hunched over in pain. He was wearing a Hawaiian shirt and holding a martini glass. He was doing a little dance, a literal cha-cha slide across his Persian rug. He spun around, laughing, and high-fived his wife, Linda. Linda was holding a stack of cash, thick bands of $100 bills. They were dumping them onto the coffee table. I zoomed in digitally. On the table, next to the cash, were the blueprints for the community gazebo, but they had red marker drawn all over them. Written across the top of the blueprints, in Arthur's distinctive, jagged handwriting, were the words, kitchen remodel and Cabo trip. My blood ran cold, then hot. The gazebo fund, the playground fund, the Save the Weeping Willow fund. It was all there, sitting on his coffee table, about to finance a granite island and a Mexican vacation. I recorded everything. I sat there for 4 hours, recording gigabytes of footage. I watched them count the money. I watched them toast to suckers. I watched Arthur mock Mrs. Gable, the elderly widow 3 doors down, mimicking her shaky voice as he recounted how she wrote him a check for $500 she probably couldn't afford. That was the breaking point. Mrs. Gable made cookies for everyone at Christmas. You do not mock Mrs. Gable. The revenge had to be public. It had to be undeniable. And as fate would have it, the monthly HOA meeting was tonight. It was being held in the community center basement. Linda was scheduled to read a statement on Arthur's behalf regarding his brave recovery. I spent the afternoon editing. I didn't want a long, boring video. I wanted a cinematic trailer of their deceit. I synced the audio of him laughing about the neighbors to the video of him dancing with the martini. I overlaid the images of the checks people had written. I created a masterpiece of exposure. The sun began to set. casting long, bruised purple shadows across the neighborhood. The wind picked up again, rattling the window panes. I dressed in my best suit. This was a funeral, after all. The funeral of Arthur's reputation. I arrived at the community center at 6:55 p.m. The room was packed. People were concerned. They were hushed. There was a solemnity in the air, a collective worry for their fearless leader. Linda stood at the podium, wearing a somber black dress, looking for all the world like a grieving saint. "Thank you all for coming," she said, her voice trembling with practiced emotion. He is fighting hard. The surgery was more complex than we thought, but his spirit is strong. He wanted me to tell you that the gazebo project is still his top priority, even from his sickbed. A murmur of approval went through the room. Someone sniffled. "I have a presentation," Linda said. "Slideshow of the proposed materials." She gestured to the AV guy, a teenager named Kyle who lived in his mom's basement and whom I had bribed with a collector's edition video game 20 minutes prior. "Kyle, if you would," she said. Kyle nodded at me. I gave the signal, a slight tap on my nose. Kyle hit play. The projector screen descended. The room went dark. But instead of pictures of lumber and bricks, the screen exploded with color. The video started. The timestamp was from this morning. There was Arthur, in 4K resolution, cha-cha sliding across his living room in a Hawaiian shirt. The room gasped, a collective intake of breath that sucked the oxygen out of the basement. "Look at this haul, Linda!" Digital Arthur screamed on the screen. "Mrs. Gable gave 500. The old bat actually believed the fountain story." In the dark room, Mrs. Gable stood up, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. On screen, Linda, the woman currently standing at the podium in a black dress, was laughing, throwing bundles of cash into the air like confetti. "Cabo is gonna be amazing! We can finally redo the master bath!" The real Linda froze. She looked at the screen, then at the audience. Her face went from somber to pale white, then to a blotchy, terrified red. This is a deepfake!" she screeched. "AI! It's AI!" On screen, Arthur zoomed in on the blueprints. The words "kitchen remodel" were clearly visible. He then turned to the camera, the very camera he forgot he installed, and winked. "To the HOA, the best piggy bank in the world." The video ended. The lights came up. The silence was heavy. It was physical. It pressed down on Linda like a physical weight. Then, slow clapping. Not applause. Slow, rhythmic, angry clapping. It was Mrs. Gable. She walked toward the podium, her cane tapping against the linoleum. She stopped inches from Linda. "I want my $500, Mrs. Gable whispered. "Now!" The chaos that ensued was beautiful. People were shouting, phones were out, the police were called. I sat in the back row, sipping the terrible, watery community center coffee, and watched the empire crumble. Arthur was arrested 2 days later for fraud and embezzlement. It turns out, when you steal money across state lines, the Vegas trip, and solicit funds under false pretenses, the authorities get very interested. The recycling bin was out on time next week, but Arthur wasn't the one dragging it to the curb. Story 2. The noise was not a creak. Houses settle. They groan and pop as the temperature shifts. I know the sound of a settling house. This was a rhythmic, dull thudding, followed by the distinct sound of a dragging chair. The problem was, the sound was coming from the other side of my duplex wall, the side that had been vacant for 8 months. The unit next to mine, 4B, was owned by a corporate entity based in Delaware. They bought it, gutted it, and then nothing. It sat empty. No for rent sign, no contractors, just a silent, hollow shell sharing a wall with my bedroom. I first heard it on a Thursday night at 2:13 a.m. I was awake, reading a book on forensic accounting, a hobby, when the vibration traveled through the plaster. Thump, 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 drag. I froze. I held my breath, straining my ears against the silence of the night. The walls in these 1970s builds are thin, but not paper thin. You have to be loud to be heard. Was it a squatter? A raccoon? A ghost? I don't believe in ghosts, but I do believe in squatters, and they are significantly more dangerous. I slid out of bed, my feet hitting the cold hard wood. I pressed my ear to the wall. Silence. Then, a voice. Low, muffled, indistinct, but definitely human, and definitely male. I grabbed my stethoscope. Yes, I own a stethoscope. It's a standard Littman Classic 3, bought off eBay for exactly this kind of situation. I placed the diaphragm against the wall, moving it slowly until I found the sweet spot between the studs where the insulation had settled. "Don't worry about it. He never comes here," the voice said. A pause. Then a woman's voice, higher, anxious. "But the neighbor? You said he's nosy." I smiled in the dark. My reputation preceded me. "He's an old hermit," the male voice dismissed. "He's probably asleep. Besides, the windows are blacked out. No one knows we're here." I lowered the stethoscope. "Hermit? I'm 34 and I work from home. But if being called a hermit was the price of anonymity, I'd pay it." I needed to know who was in 4B. The front door of the empty unit was right next to mine, but they hadn't come in that way. I would have heard the distinct squeal of the weather stripping. They must have entered through the backsliding door, which faced the dense woods bordering the property. The next morning, after the voices had ceased around 4 a.m., I went into landscaping mode. I put on my gardening gloves and grabbed a rake. I worked my way around the side of the building to the back patio of 4B. The sliding door was locked. The vertical blinds were drawn tight. But on the concrete patio, there was a clue. A small, muddy footprint. Not a boot, a high heel. A distinct stiletto heel mark in a patch of mud near the track, and next to it, the tread of a men's dress shoe. This wasn't a homeless squatter. Homeless squatters don't wear stilettos to break into abandoned duplexes. This was a tryst. I examined the lock on the sliding door. It hadn't been picked. It wasn't broken. It was pristine. That meant they had a key. Who has a key to a corporate-owned empty unit? The property manager. I went back inside and pulled up the property records. The management company was Apex Realty. The local agent listed was a man named Greg Sanders. I looked up Greg Sanders. He was a quintessential real estate bro. Bleached teeth, too much gel, posing with the leased BMW on his Instagram. I looked at his wife's profile. Happily married to my soulmate. Her name was Jessica. She was pregnant. The plot thickened like day-old oatmeal. That night I prepared. I couldn't drill a hole in the wall, destruction of property, but I could slide a fiber optic camera under the shared attic space. No, too risky. I decided on the external approach. I own a high-sensitivity directional microphone. It looks like a small satellite dish. I set it up on my back deck, aimed directly at the sliding door of 4B, camouflaged behind a potted ficus plant. I ran the cable under my door and hooked it to my laptop. I waited. 1 a.m. Nothing. 2 a.m. Nothing. 2:45 a.m. A car engine cut off. Not in the driveway, but down the street. They were parking away to avoid detection. 5 minutes later, the soft crunch of footsteps on dry leaves. They were coming through the woods.
I watched the audio waveforms on my screen spike. "God, it's freezing," the woman whispered. The directional mic picked it up as if she were standing next to me. "Hurry up, get inside," the male voice said. It was Greg.
I'd watched his YouTube videos on how to flip houses. I knew that nasal, overconfident baritone anywhere. The sliding door clicked and slid open. They were inside. I switched from the external mic to the wall stethoscope. "I can't keep doing this, Greg," the woman said. "The company is going to do a walkthrough soon. If they find the mattress..." "They aren't coming until next month," Greg assured her. "I control the schedule. I'm the regional manager, remember? I own this territory." "But your wife..." "Jessica is clueless. She thinks I'm doing late showings." I felt a surge of righteous indignation. Jessica was pregnant. This guy was using a vacant property he managed to cheat on his pregnant wife. It was efficient, I'll give him that, but morally bankrupt. I needed visual confirmation. Audio is good. Video is leverage. The next day, while the unit was empty, I tried the sliding door. Locked. But I noticed something. The lock was a standard latch. And I had a specialized tool, a Slim Jim for patio doors, that I had 3D printed a few months ago just to see if the schematics online worked. I checked the coast. Clear. I shimmied the tool between the doors. Click. I slid the door open 3 inches. I slipped inside. The smell hit me first. Cheap cologne and stale fast food. The living room was empty, except for a blow-up mattress in the center of the floor, a small battery-powered lantern, and a cooler. I didn't have much time. I didn't want to leave a camera that could be found. I needed to be subtler. I looked at the smoke detector on the ceiling. It was wired into the house's electricity. It had a green LED that blinked. I had a spare smoke detector, identical model, but mine had been modified with a pinhole camera connected to a long-range transmitter. I dragged a painter's bucket over, stood on it, untwisted their smoke detector, and twisted mine in. It took 30 seconds. I was back in my unit with the door locked in under 2 minutes. That night, the show began. They arrived at 3 a.m. I watched on my monitor. The quality was grainy, grayscale, but undeniable. Greg Sanders. And the woman? It wasn't just some random fling. It was the frantic woman from Story 1. Linda, the HOA president's wife. My jaw hit the desk. Linda, who had just been exposed for embezzlement, was cheating on Arthur with the realtor? This neighborhood was a cesspool. Wait, if Linda was here, she wasn't in jail. She must have made bail. Or maybe this footage was the prequel. No, the timestamp was now. She was out on bail, and instead of laying low, she was meeting Greg. "Arthur is going to flip on me," Linda was sobbing, sitting on the blow-up mattress. "He's going to tell the feds I knew about the accounts." Greg was pacing. "Linda, you gotta calm down. You transfer the rest of the crypto to my wallet, and I get you the passport. That was the deal." Crypto? Passport? This wasn't just an affair. This was an escape plan. Greg wasn't her lover. He was her fence. He was helping her launder the remaining stolen HOA money and flee the country. The affair was the cover story they were using to meet in secret. "I can't access the cold wallet," Linda cried. "It's in the safe. The police sealed the house." "Then break the seal," Greg shouted. "You want to go to prison? You think you'll survive prison? You're soft, Linda. You need me." I hit record. This was way better than an affair. This was conspiracy to commit money laundering and flight from prosecution. I had a choice: send this to the police anonymously, or have a little fun first. I chose fun. I accessed the smart thermostat of the empty unit. Greg, being a tech-savvy realtor, had installed a Nest thermostat in the unit to monitor efficiency. It was connected to the same Wi-Fi he was likely tethering off his phone. I brute forced the pin. 0,000. People never learn. I turned the heat up, all the way up, 90 degrees. On the camera, I saw them start to sweat. They took off their jackets. Then they started fanning themselves. "Why is it so hot in here?" Linda complained. "The system is probably malfunctioning," Greg grunted. Then I hacked the smart speaker they had brought with them, a little Bluetooth speaker sitting on the cooler. I hijacked the Bluetooth signal. I played a sound file, police siren.mp3. It started soft, then got loud. In the video, Greg and Linda froze. They looked at the door. I cut the siren. Silence. "Did you hear that?" Linda whispered. "Shh," Greg hissed. I played a recording of a heavy fist pounding on a door. Thud, thud, thud. "Open up, FBI!" I played the audio clip I had ripped from a movie. Total panic. Greg scrambled, tripping over the blow-up mattress. Linda screamed and tried to gather her purse. Greg ran to the sliding door, threw it open, and bolted into the woods, leaving Linda behind. So much for the soulmate. Linda was hyperventilating in the middle of the room. I let them simmer for 10 minutes. Greg didn't come back. Then I did the responsible thing. I called the non-emergency line of the local police. "Hi, yes, I'm a neighbor at address. I believe there are intruders in the vacant unit next door. I heard screaming and saw a man running into the woods." The police arrived in 6 minutes. They found Linda illegally trespassing with a bag full of flash drives and a notebook containing bank account numbers. When they dragged her out, she looked at my window. The blinds were drawn. I was just a silhouette. Greg was picked up the next morning at his office. It's hard to explain why you were meeting a known embezzler in a vacant house at 3 a.m. His wife, Jessica, filed for divorce 3 days later. I retrieved my smoke detector the following week during an open house. No loose ends. Story 3. You would think, after the HOA scandal and the duplex debacle, the neighborhood would settle down. You would be wrong. The vacuum of power left by Arthur Pembroke attracted a new kind of predator. Enter Silas Vane. Silas moved into the corner house, the big Victorian that had been on the market for 2 years because of structural issues, termites. Silas didn't fix the termites. He painted the door red and hung wind chimes, hundreds of wind chimes. Silas claimed to be a life coach and spiritual consultant. He wore linen tunics. He walked barefoot to get the mail. He smiled with too many teeth. The hook for this story wasn't a sound or a recycling bin. It was a pattern of delivery trucks. I track delivery logistics. It's a hobby. I know that UPS usually hits our street at 11 a.m., FedEx at 2 p.m., and Amazon is a wild card. But at Silas's house, the trucks were constant, and they were heavy. One Tuesday, I watched a delivery driver struggle with a box marked fragile, heavy. He dropped it on Silas's porch. It made a sound like shattering glass. Silas came out, not angry but smiling. He blessed the driver. He literally put his hand on the driver's forehead and blessed him. The driver looked terrified. Silas dragged the box inside. 2 hours later, another truck arrived. This time it was an unmarked white van. 2 men in jumpsuits got out. They carried out a box of identical size to the one that was delivered, loaded it into the van, and drove off. 1 box. This happened every day for 3 weeks. Was he reselling? No. The boxes leaving were different packaging. I needed to see the trash, but Silas didn't use a trash can. He claimed to be zero waste. He composted everything, or so he said. One night, a storm rolled in, a massive thunderstorm that knocked out the power to the whole block. The streetlights died. The houses went black. Perfect cover. I put on my night vision goggles. Yes, I have them. Don't ask. I crept across the street to Silas's backyard.
The compost pile was in the far corner. I approached it. It smelled chemical, not like rotting vegetables, like acetone and toner. I dug my gloved hand into the pile. It wasn't compost. It was shredded paper, mixed with coffee grounds to disguise it.
I grabbed a handful of the wet sludge and retreated to my basement lab, laundry room. I spent the next 6 hours drying the sludge and separating the strips of paper with tweezers. It was a puzzle from hell, but slowly words began to form. Warranty void. Authentic replica. Certificate of authenticity. 18th century Ming. And then a full label that hadn't been shredded properly. Made in China. Silas Vane, the spiritual guru, was running a high-end counterfeit antique ring. He was buying cheap, mass-produced replicas of vases, statues, and artifacts from overseas, the heavy boxes. He was then aging them. The chemical smell in the compost? That was the aging process. Acids, stains, fake patinas. He was repackaging them as cursed or blessed artifacts and selling them to wealthy, gullible collectors for thousands of dollars. The white vans were the private couriers for his high-end clients. But knowing it is one thing, proving it is another. I needed to catch him in the act of the transformation. I couldn't get inside his house. He had motion sensors everywhere. For a spiritualist, he was very paranoid. But I could get into his digital life. Silas had a website, VaneSpiritualArtifacts.com. It was password protected, members only. I created a fake persona, Baroness von Stupp, a wealthy European heiress looking for items of power. I used a VPN routed through Switzerland. I sent an inquiry. Dear Silas, I seek a vessel for my negative energy. Money is no object. He bit. Oh, he bit hard. Dear Baroness, he replied within 10 minutes, I have just received a sacred urn from a monastery in Tibet. It vibrates with ancient power. Price, $25,000. I asked for photos. He sent them. A beautiful, cracked, dusty urn. It looked ancient. I ran a reverse image search. Nothing. Then I ran an error level analysis on the photo. I zoomed in on the background. In the reflection of the sacred urn, you could see a bottle of Insta-Age wood stains sitting on his workbench. Gotcha. But I wanted to destroy him. I wanted to see the look on his face when the universe balanced his karma. I agreed to buy the urn, but I insisted on picking it up in person. My private jet lands on Friday. I will send my driver. I didn't have a driver. I hired an actor. A massive, intimidating guy named Tiny from a local casting agency. I rented a limousine. I also tipped off the actual buyer of the original urn. See, Silas wasn't just faking antiques. He was copying real museum pieces. The urn he was selling me was a copy of one stolen from a collection in London 3 years ago. I sent an anonymous tip to the art loss register. I believe the stolen Tibetan urn is at address. Friday came. The setup was intricate. Tiny, the actor, pulled up in the limo. Silas came out, wearing a gold robe, holding the box. The Baroness is inside? Silas asked, peering at the tinted windows. She waits, Tiny grunted. At that exact moment, 2 black SUVs screeched into the cul-de-sac. Homeland Security, Art Crimes Division. They didn't just knock, they swarmed. Federal agents, drop the box. Silas dropped the box. Smash. The sacred urn shattered. The agents rushed in. They inspected the shards. One agent picked up a piece. He looked at it. He looked at Silas. This is plaster of Paris, the agent said. This is a fake. Silas looked relieved. Yes, it's just a replica. I'm an artist. I'm not a thief. The agent frowned. Then why did you sell it as a genuine antiquity for $25,000? That's wire fraud, son. Silas's face crumbled. He realized he had walked into a trap. If it was real, he was a fence for stolen goods. If it was fake, he was a fraudster. There was no spiritual path out of this. They raided his house. They found the aging chemicals. They found the made in China stickers he had peeled off. They found a ledger of all the people he had scammed. As they led him away in handcuffs, his linen tunic flapping in the wind, he looked up at the sky, shouting, "My chakras are aligned! You cannot cage the spirit!" "Get in the car, dirtbag," the agent said. The wind chimes on his porch rattled violently, a chaotic symphony of cheap metal. I watched from my window, sipping a fresh cup of coffee. The neighborhood was quiet again. The HOA tyrant was gone. The cheating ring was dismantled. The spiritual scammer was in federal custody. But then I saw a moving truck pull up to the empty lot at the end of the street. A man got out. He was carrying a large metallic case that looked suspiciously like a signal jammer. He looked at the street, then he looked directly at my window. He smiled. I put down my coffee. I picked up my binoculars. It looks like story 4 is just beginning, but that is a file for another day.